Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got some disassembly and maintenance as well as a little bit of a sneak preview of my thoughts on this little guy right here. This is the Spyderco Knives Canis. Canis? Not 100% sure whether it rhymes with anus. I don't know. We're just going to go on ahead and power through nonetheless. This is really tightened down in the pivot area. So the question here becomes, is that Loctited? What's going on here? So this appears to be T8, T10. Looks like T8. T9 was a little big. Just want to make sure I got proper fit. And then I will take this guy with this little tool here. There we go. This little tool, by the way, if you're ever curious about any of the tools I'm using on my channel, check out nickshabazz.com/tools. But this little tool set here that Drive is aftermarket is a really good go-to for if you find yourself in a situation where, normally I use these hand drivers because in a lot of ways these hand drivers are not only very good and very quick, but they also don't allow me to put too much torque onto things. And that can actually be very helpful because it allows me to avoid stripping screws and things like that. If I need more torque than this is going to allow me to give, then frankly, I need to back up and reevaluate. So, yeah, but that appears to just have been thread locked a little bit. Or maybe over tight. No, there's some thread locker in there. That's fine. Whatever. It'll work. But we appear to be getting this guy apart nonetheless. And this is an interesting piece. First off, I guess since I'm doing the disassembly and impressions, there we go. I should thank my Patreon patrons for making it possible for me to just buy something like this. This guy was not sent to me by Spyderco. I think they've been a little bit busy over there at Spyderco, and so as a result, haven't gotten many review samples. Well, actually, any review samples in a while, but that's okay. I'm very happy to have a community that supports me, and, happy to do both. So, anyways, there we go. Let's go ahead and clean this guy off. What we see here is this is using the Spyderco compression. Hey, that's a pivot bushing. So this little washer, right, well, not washer, bearing? I'm not even sure what the technical term is, but this little unit around the pivot there, this collar, I suppose, collar would be the choice. But anyways, that little pivot collar there is a pivot bushing, which basically means that the spacing is maintained between the two scales, allowing the blade to go freely and just rotate against those washers. Those brass washers right here, or phosphor bronze likely. But nonetheless, we have ourselves a ceramic detent ball, we have ourselves a pair of phosphor bronze washers, and we have ourselves a pivot bushing, which is why this knife was so damn smooth out of the box. So that's cool. Well done. I love that Spyderco's doing more of these pivot bushing approaches. And they're very, very quiet about it, too. I kind of, at some level, it's like, dude, you could advertise based on that. Like, marketing-wise, they're one of few companies doing it, and it does offer some compelling advantages, but I guess they're not gonna. Whatever, it works out. But anyways, so, yeah, pivot bushing construction here. Aside from that, it's a pretty vanilla compression lock, honestly. Ain't a whole lot else to say about it. It's just a fine little piece. So we've got this guy fully apart. Let's put it back together here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to take my pivot, and I'll wipe that off, even though the pivot bushing should be where most of the gunktion builds up. Go ahead and put that in there. And note, by the way, that there is a D shape right here, and there is a D shape on the pivot. So we should be able to pop this through here. And then we will put this guy here. And we've got those secondary stop pin sorts of effects. Oh, just the one here. Down there, Spyderco's been doing a lot of kind of work in the lab, so to speak, on the internals of their Taichung models. I gotta respect it. Using some knife pivot lube here. The lettering has come off the box, but it should look like this, knife pivot lube. Because I find that the action it gives is very often a little bit nicer on washer-based actions than some of the other alternatives, namely nano oil, although both work just fine. So if you got one, you're probably good to go. So now the next step is going to be to drop this onto here. One thing to note, again, is that there is this bushing here, and that goes in the center there, around the pivot. Then I'm going to put the washer in. And one thing to note here is, look at the washer. There's a flat side, then there's a side with a little crimp where the bushing is sat. That's the side you want to have down. Whatever was down, you want to have stay down. So I'll drop that onto there. I'll rotate that a little bit, just so it spins a little bit more freely. And then I'm going to put a little bit of oil here onto the detent ball hole. And that will allow this guy to slide along the blade quite freely. Then all I have to do is pop everything back together here. And that should work. I need to get my pivot back through. And in order to press the pivot through, I actually needed to lift up on the compression lock. That takes some of the tension out of the system and allows the pivot to slide in. And then at this point, all we have to do is drop the scale back on, which is one of those carbon fiber, but not carbon fiber, but carbon fiber sort of toppers. Spyderco has a tendency to use those. To me, I don't know, it doesn't bug me that much, but for a lot of people, it's for whatever reason, oh my God. So, you know, it's an aesthetic thing. But either way, it seems fine here. And then I'll tighten that down just slightly at this point. I mean, with a pivot bushing, I probably will be tightening it down pretty fully, but for the moment, I want to make sure I get everything else in before I go cranking on any one of the screws, you know? Tighten this into place. This, you know, I'm starting into my, my first impressions video, but without having really carried it much, just haven't played with a little bit, so to speak, I have to say, this runs the risk of being a knife that very much surprises me. I sort of picked this up out of curiosity more than anything. Like, it's a little weird, right? And when Spyderco does weird, very often, it can be very weird, but it can also be quite compelling. And this guy, okay, that's way too loose still. So let's go ahead and tighten down further. Okay, that's way too tight. There's got to be a middle ground. Okay, something's up here. I'm getting a little bit of blade play even with this guy fully closed, and the centering isn't quite right. So I'm thinking that I've got something not quite seated in here. Did I reassemble this backwards? No, I don't think so. Okay, now there is absolutely no play, but the action is maybe a little tighter than I'd like, and it's also, the centering is now off to one side. What I suspect is going on then is that I've tightened the back side down here and left a little tension in the system. So when I loosen those back screws, the centering goes back to something more approximating normal. So that means I probably tightened things down a little soon in the back there. Well, the pivot was still loose, and as a result, yeah, now we're much closer to back in place. And still a little tight, a little bindy. So, what I'm going to go ahead and do is try little micro adjustments, as opposed to adjustments that occur on dirty jobs, which are micro adjustments. No? Okay, that was perhaps a specific cultural reference, but it's a good show, actually. Very much like the attitude Mike Rowe has. Just like, yeah, these are things that are important for the world, right? Anybody who's willing to judge you on what you do to put pay on the table. Yeah, we're all making do, right? Anyways, I digress. Where are we at here? Is that play? Okay. No, play went away. We are still a little tight. But the thing is, the other thing to remember here is that I haven't really done much of anything. I haven't used it much. So it may smooth out a little bit more over time. Okay. Where are we at here? A little bit of play now. Tighten back up just a touch. Oh, interesting. Something, I'm feeling like I might have got, there may be like a hair or something in here. Or some kind of piece or something, because it's acting a little bit weird. Like it's suddenly loosening up a little bit more than I would expect it to, etc. So let's go on ahead and pull things back apart one more time and check to see what's going on. This is perhaps unnecessary. It's probably very unnecessary, but at the same time, you know, I feel like it's a good idea to make that happen, just to check. And especially when there's been a lot of Loctite in the play, or in the fray, that is, that can sometimes, little bits and pieces of that can get under washers, etc. Okay. So we got a little bit of Loctite on the top surface of the screw. That shouldn't cause too much issue. The other thing I can do is swap the washers around. Put that there. It shouldn't matter, but, you know, if I'm in here already, yeah, we're looking clean here. So I'll put this back into place. Oh, come on, washer, get on there. That is the side where we want the pivot bushing to be. The other possibility is that my washers aren't entirely flat here. If I were, well, there. If I were super concerned, one thing I could always do is to polish the washers a little bit. But for the moment, I don't know that that's, strictly speaking, necessary. Let's clean that a little bit more in the way of oil. Oh, there. Drop this into place. All right, now I clean this off. Aha! Little something on there. I don't even know what that was, but it was between, it was right here. And fiber or something. And as a result, if that, look, I'm assuming that was actually a thing that I noticed there, and that it was a thing of any substance, solidity, it looks like it could be actually old fragments of Loctite. Having that behind the washer, meaning that one of the washers was kind of cocked up to the side, that could very much lead to something like I was just feeling there, or it just wasn't working perfectly. So this is one of the difficulties of disassembling a knife, right? Is especially one where you've got things, you know, relatively tight in there, tight tolerances and such. But, you know, that you end up with, well, it's easy to have little issues, but very often if you just take it back apart again, make sure everything's cleaned out in there, and then put it back together, everything's going to be okay. But another part of this is just experience. I'm going to be honest with you. And this is one of the things that I think is difficult when I do these, how to disassemble and maintain videos, is like, well, this is great advice as long as you've disassembled a billion knives. But if you haven't before, maybe some of these areas are going to be a little bit more opaque, right? You know, you might not notice, wait a second, this doesn't feel quite right. That shouldn't be. And so it just feels like, oh, God, I screwed it up. And so I always encourage you, you know, very often I'll get people who email me say, oh my God, Nick, I took apart my, you know, Crinkle Fleep 867. Oh yeah, that's maybe a little nicer. No blade play. Beautiful drop shot action. Now I bet once I tighten these guys with the pivot in full tightness, centering is more or less dead on. Okay, yeah, so very often what I meant to say, the ending to that story is just that when people message me, the very first thing I tell them to do is take it back apart, clean it out again, put it back together again. 90% of the time, people will send me back something like, oh my God, Nick, I don't know what changed. And the thing that changed is probably a little piece of BS just like this one. And so as a result, you end up with something that is, you know, had I just put this back together again and said, well, man, this thing kind of sucks, you know, it's always that's always a little bit of a fright. But now that I cleaned that out of there, now that there was no longer something under the washer binding, this knife runs freaking beautifully. And oh man, I got to be honest with you there. That was it doesn't seem like much, but I've needed a moral win lately, so to speak, and that was a good one. You know, it's always nice to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, so to speak. But anyways, now let's talk about the knife itself. Now that I've finished opining about, you know, the joys of reassembling, let's talk about the Spyderco Canis a little bit here. This guy is weird. This is 1000% a very strange knife. The biggest weird thing about it is this guy right here, this little piece of the blade, where it is kind of carved out there. This is done, apparently, according to Spyderco, for weight reduction. The other thing to note, though, is that the edge on this is super, super thin. This has a nice, what appears to, yeah, that's a hollow grind, 100%. So even though the edge itself is relatively low on the knife, the grind itself is low on the knife, because it's a hollow grind and it kind of comes in like this, it really thins out. So this is a cutting beast. Ergonomically speaking, it's quite on point here. The utility style Warncliffe blade is very helpful for draw cuts, kind of like this. The stock thickness on it isn't out of line. It's weird, and it's big, and it's a little bit murdery. This is maybe not a lunchroom's, friendly knife. I'll throw this guy, about 3.5 inches here, a blade, depending on how much the cop likes you. But S30V is a good-to-go steel. This is actually a knife that I didn't expect to like at all, but at first blush, it's kind of cool, right? It's doing something a little different in terms of blade shape. It's doing something a little different in terms of aesthetics. Ergonomically, it's really on point. The clip positioning here is great. In terms of downsides, this little area right here I'm not super in love with, but that's just, Spyderco's steadfast refusal to put in a sharpening choil, whatever. And what other difficulties? Honestly, are there any hot spots on this guy? Not really. Maybe the clip's a little high, but you could rebend that. Honestly, I'm sort of, it's weird, but that's not a problem, right? And this actually feels like a knife that could have very easily appealed to folks who were after things like the Yojimbo, the Yojumbo now, as well as, I can picture this guy, this is probably also being thought of as a self-defense knife. And although I'm very much a proponent of the very best self-defense knife being a pair of running shoes, meaning run away. The winner of the knife fight dies in the hospital, not on the street. But anyways, I digress. More importantly, this feels like a reasonably solid everyday carry piece as well. And so it's weird. It's absolutely weird. And by the way, I mentioned the scales. That's going to bug some people as well. But for the most part, honestly, with the pivot bushing, with the hollow grind here, I'm pretty impressed. I'll give it some more time. I'll give it some carry. I'll let you know my full thoughts. But for the moment, not bad work at all. And I'm genuinely looking forward to giving this guy more pocket time. And that's kind of, that itself is sort of a good sign. So anyways, there you go. That is the Spyderco Canis, and that is a valuable lesson about why it's a good idea to trust your own, if something seems wrong, just back up and try it again. Because that little tiny chunk of Loctite can absolutely screw the action up on something that is otherwise beautiful. So anyways, there you go. I hope this is interesting to you. Have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.